Hello everybody! So today is the day of Dunkirk being released here in the UK. Yeah, I'm really excited to see this film. Christopher Nolan's one of my favourite directors. It has such a great cast. I'm obviously excited to see how Harry Styles does in his debut performance. But yeah, another reason I've really been intrigued to see this film is because I've always been particularly interested in World War II films. I don't know what it is about World War II. I've just found it particularly interesting. So yeah, anything that will further my knowledge of World War II I find really fascinating. And yeah, I'm really excited to see how they've done with the cinematography, the sound design, the edit. From the trailer, all of that aspect of things looks amazing. So cannot wait, and yeah. It is actually the next day now. I did have the intention of filming straight after, but we got back so late and, you know. For me, it's definitely one of the films of the year, if not the film of the year. It's very different and unique in the way that it's been done. It doesn't focus on any one character's story in particular. It's very widespread, focused on everyone in general, so that you don't get too attached to one person over another. You end up rooting for everyone equally, which I thought was a really, really great way of approaching this, that everyone is equal. No one is more worthy than others to be saved and taken home on these boats. Yeah, just to say as well, obviously there's going to be spoilers if you haven't seen Dunkirk yet. I'm going to be talking about what happens. So yeah, go and see it definitely if you haven't. And if my reaction encourages you to go and see it, then brilliant. I loved it. Yeah, it's one of those films where you come out and I just couldn't stop talking about it and thinking about it, and I'd have like a break, then I'd straight away start thinking about it again and like going over and over everything that happened. I feel like I can remember everything that happened in this film from start to finish and in what order it happened, which is a tough feat, can I just say, because this was not a chronological order film. If that's what you're expecting, then it's not going to be that. But I feel like I remember everything, which is so rare. I find that when I see a film, there's always parts where I forget, or I'm like, oh, what happened then? Like, I don't really remember how we got from this place to the next. But I felt like I was so present in this film, and I felt like I was there every step of the way, like following their journey. It was a very impactful film in that sense, that I feel like I remember everything. So I guess I'll just start at the beginning. So the film itself started not in a way that I would expect a typical, say, Hollywood blockbuster war film to start. It didn't have any sort of glamorized blockbuster aerial view. You were just sort of launched straight into the midst of things, and with these lads walking down the street, you're like thrown straight into the action and a really tense environment. I loved that it wasn't over glamorized, it was very raw, and instantly you felt a connection for these people, and that just kind of made it seem much more genuine. One shot in particular I remember that really stood out for me, and I kept sort of going back to it throughout watching the film just to make sure I didn't forget it. It was right at the beginning, after, I think it's pronounced Fionn or Finn without the O, I'm not entirely sure. I'm going to say Fionn. So Fionn Whitehead was the main guy as such. So he has just come on to the beach, which was also an incredibly powerful shot. That was only not my favourite shot because I'd seen it in the trailer, if that makes sense. Then there was a shot where everyone was lined up on the beach and it pans backwards and there's two poles. You don't see the top or the bottom of the pole or the exterior of the shot. You just see the poles with the guys out of focus behind. And I thought that was very symbolic of them being trapped and encaged with no escape from this beach. They also held on that shot for longer than you normally would do, I suppose. It gave it the extra time for you to really focus on what that shot is trying to tell you. And I loved it. I loved that shot. Yeah, there's also a few parts where I was very impressed that the editor wasn't afraid to clash shots that didn't particularly match up as to what a normal cut would be as such. What I mean by that is I really remember at the end of the film, Tom Hardy had just come out of his plane. There was one shot that we were very engaged with, and then it cut to a different shot, and the whole colouring of the whole shot was completely different, so it was quite jarring, and it did kind of take me out of it a little bit because it was such an extreme difference in saturation. At the same time, I feel like that signifies throughout this whole film you're very on edge, very on edge. They don't want you to feel comfortable, they want you to be on the edge of your seat and not know what the shot is going to be next. To jar you like that visually, I think keeps you engaged in the film, keeps you present. Yeah, it just overall added to the tense feel of the film, I guess. The fact that you never know what to expect. Another aspect of the film I found very interesting, which I didn't know about before watching, that it wasn't in chronological order. I also didn't realise this. I believe this was on purpose. I didn't realise that that was the case until about halfway through, or maybe a third or quarter of the way through. Things weren't happening in the right order. Characters would turn up in places straight after they'd been in another place and it's a different time of day. And then I suddenly realised I'd been too engaged in what was happening to even realise that it wasn't even in order. So I thought that was very, very clever of the director in this case. The defining moment for me when it changed from being in order to not was when the actor Cillian Murphy was on a boat with the dad and the two lads, and then all of a sudden he's on a boat with everybody else. That was when I was like, wait, what's happening? This isn't going to be as easy as I thought it was going to be to follow. And from then on, it got very back and forth and overlapping in terms of the storyline until eventually it did catch back up with itself. I particularly loved that scene as well when the men were jumping from the ship into the oil that had spread into the water. This was a very intense scene actually, and now that I think about it more, you start to realise that these lads that are in this situation, possibly the guys that were what we believed were currently hiding in the other boat on the shore. So it was all very everything on top of each other, and then it was also cutting to the scenes of the Spitfires. It was very intense in that sense. You got all of the action on top of each other, which obviously is very genuine to how the situation was, how the war was, that everything's happening at once. You don't get a break when you're in these situations. It's going to be everything happening at all times. You can't get away from it. This thing's happening there, something's happening there. Yeah, that's why it felt so intense, I think, because in the back of your mind you know that that is how intense it was. I mean, you can't even describe how intense it was. I have no idea, obviously. We can only sort of imagine and have respect for the guys that went through it, but watching this film definitely gave me a bigger insight to it, and I am very thankful for that. Yeah, also I'd like to say that in my screening, a lot of people have been saying and expecting that a lot of like young teenage girls will be going, obviously for Harry, but in my screening there wasn't. I'd say I was the youngest person there, and I'm 24, so, and this was at like early on a Friday evening, so it was different to what I expected the audience to be. And there was a lot of people from the older generations there, and we were actually sat with a older couple, and it just made the experience that much more emotional, and I was very thankful to get to experience and watch it alongside these people that potentially were involved or had family members that were, or parents that were. It was very touching and humbling to get to sit alongside them and watch it as they held their partners and watched it together. It was a very silent movie theatre. I don't think I've ever sat... Why did I say movie theatre? That's definitely not what we call it in England. It was a very silent cinema. Everyone was so respectful of the subject matter, and it was, I can't even explain, it was a lot different to what I'd ever experienced before. I literally came out of the film and wrote down a lot of notes about how I felt and my favourite parts and everything so that I didn't forget. So Fionn, I thought he was brilliant as the sort of lead role, I suppose. He was a great sort of steady character to root for throughout the film. I also loved the fact that Christopher Nolan chose to cast people that hadn't necessarily been in big roles before in films. It made it a lot more raw and genuine, and it didn't distract you. You didn't necessarily look at these people and associate them with another role. You don't have that sort of emotional connection to them, then you're not going to be distracted. You're going to be as engaged in their experience as possible, which I thought was great. So I had two favourite parts of this film. One being when the civilian boats turned up towards the end. Is he called the captain? I don't really want to say people's roles and then have got them wrong, but said that he could see home, and it was the people that had come to help, the civilians coming in their little boats across the horizon, and it was so uplifting and heartwarming and inspirational and amazing. And then just like that, you hear the rumbling of the engines from the planes coming to come and obviously bomb these people, and then all of your hope is drained from you. I literally just got goosebumps thinking about it. It was just the most beautiful and upsetting scene all in one. Okay, I'm actually like tearing up a little bit. This is so weird. I think it's because it like affected me so much when I watched the film. Yeah, so they had all of their hope stripped from them. I can't even believe that I'm like crying, what the hell. Yeah, they had all of their hope stripped from them, and then Tom Hardy, sorry I don't know their characters because it wasn't focused on character names at all, so I'm just referencing them as their actor names. So Tom Hardy was running out of fuel on his Spitfire, and then he basically used up some of his last ammunition, I suppose, on his plane to take down the plane that was coming in from the opposition, to take down the remaining survivors on the beach. Everything changed, so the lighting went down slightly. All of a sudden, Tom Hardy has taken down this plane, and it's okay, and everyone's cheering for Tom Hardy. He's flying over the beach. All of the soldiers are looking up at him, like thanking him so much. While that was also beautiful and amazing, you also know that he's run out of fuel, so what's going to happen to him? Yeah, it's just so many feelings all at once. And then he is trying to get his wheels of his plane down, and then that was a very difficult scene to watch as well, obviously. Eventually he did, and then he landed, and then you obviously have this feeling of, oh my god, yes, he survived, one absolute hero. But by that time he's flown so far down the beach that he's so far away from his men. The second he lands, you realise, but now what? And then that's when you see that he sets fire to his plane, and the opposition comes and takes him away. And that's sort of the last moment that you see him. I sort of read into it as the reason for him setting fire to his plane being that someone then found his plane and it was set on fire. That's how they would assume that he had died, and not that he'd been taken away by the opposition. So I imagine that was kind of a way to try and bring peace to his family, letting them know that he died in honour in his plane rather than in that way. The final shot of the film I found interesting because the second to last shot was the plane on fire, which I thought was an amazingly beautifully shot. And then it cut to Theon on his own on the train, and it was in silence, and I thought that was very interesting. And then it cut to the credits. So that was an interesting choice as well. That was completely against the norm of how you would end a, per se, blockbuster movie. Oh my god, my eye is now twitching. So yeah, it wasn't a particularly like overwhelming end, but I thought it was very beautiful and peaceful, the end. And also it made you think about what he was thinking as he tries to come to terms with it himself. But yeah, in general, I'm just so like emotionally invested and in awe of this film and the way that it was done, the way it was produced, cast, shot, edited, colour graded. The sound design in particular, there was a lot of like the ticking noise, which is a little gimmicky, but in this instance it did definitely help. And the second the ticking stops, you realise that you were listening to it the entire film, but you didn't necessarily know that you were. Yeah, it was just very interesting. Cillian Murphy's character, when he was sat on his crashed plane in the middle of the sea, I still don't know how he got onto that other boat. I'm really confused about that, like still to now. I have no idea. That's the only part of this film that I couldn't understand for myself and realise what had happened in terms of the chronological mismatch. Unless it was a different actor, but I'm pretty sure it was the same actor. But it was just a little bit of a mind thing, you know? A bit of inception, you could say. Yeah, so if anyone knows, then do let me know, but I guess I'll have to research into it. The cinematography in the film was on a next level. The plane shots in particular were my favourite. They were just so stunning and beautiful. It's all a bit conflicting in how to feel about this film, because like visually you're enjoying it and then you realise why it's even happening. But yeah, I'm just like in awe of this film, and obviously of the men that fought for us in World War II and everyone that was involved in that. So at the end, the captain, I believe, stayed behind, and they asked him why he was staying, and he said that he was staying for the French. And wow, yeah, that got me as well. I started crying instantly, and I was just like, wow, the bravery of these people is just outstanding. And then obviously I am a fan of Harry Styles, so I was very interested to see how he dealt with this role and this film and subject matter. When he first came on the screen, it was a little bit like, it did take me out of it slightly, because I was like, oh my god, this is exciting to see how he's going to act, obviously, and how it's going to be and what his character's going to be like. But once that had been introduced and I'd heard how he spoke and everything like that, I kind of just went straight back into the storyline and sort of just treated him the same as everyone else, although it is quite exciting. Obviously, if you're a fan of these particular actors and they've been cast in the film, you're going to have like a special engagement with that character, if that makes sense. That's why I've left it to the end of the video, just to like not piss anyone off that really doesn't care about this. I thought it was really funny hearing him talk faster than he normally does. He's known for being a very slow talker. So he changed his accent slightly to be current with the time, and he spoke a lot faster, and it was much more like manly, I guess. So I found that very entertaining just to see in that sense. I thought he pulled it off very well. They also tried to make him sort of a bad guy, I guess. There was a part where he turned on someone else. He was one of the people that was very conflicted, and at the end you could see that he was conflicted in himself. Once he was safe, he was very tense and stressed, his character this is, and felt very ashamed of himself on that train. And was like, no one's going to want to know about us, they're going to laugh at us in the streets, like they don't want to know, they'll throw things at us and everything. So I really felt for his character when he didn't want to see that man looking at him through the window, and then the second he realised that the man was offering him a drink. I got goosebumps again. He felt so much relief in himself, and maybe offered himself a little bit more forgiveness for what he'd done. He did obviously go back on his choice and tried to help the French guy get out of the boat in that situation, but unfortunately he didn't make it. But you could see that his character was really battling with that. Oh god, I'm going again. Not just because it's Harry, honestly. But yeah, I thought that overall he did very well, as did all of the other newbie guys. They all did an amazing job. The fact I was so invested in this film is a great testament to them as well. So yeah, I think that's about it really. The film as it stands has a 92% rating on Rotten Tomatoes, which I think is amazing and very well deserved. I think I'll go back and see it again. I'll take some other people to go and see it because they need to see it. Also, just to mention the sound design, I don't know if it was just my cinema or whether it was the sound design itself. It was very loud and very intense. They want you to feel very overwhelmed and attacked, and that's definitely what I felt like in most of the scenes, so they did a great job on that. And yeah, I guess that's about it really. I'm really worried that I've forgotten something and I'm gonna edit this and watch it back and be like, oh no, I really wanted to say that. But yeah, there's not anything really that I can criticise about this film, to be honest. The only things that you could even like criticise or have an opinion on are things that they didn't do on purpose. I feel like I've been talking for ages, and that is it from me. I hope you enjoyed watching this reaction slash review kind of thing, and maybe I'll see you again soon. Bye!